Good morning, writers. Happy to see all of you here. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. I know that I personally did. I did actually a lot of writing this weekend. And when I say a lot, I guess I actually mean to say that I did some kind of like prelim writing in a sense. Like I did a lot of outlining this weekend, so that way I would be prepared this week to do mostly writing and not as much outlining. To give you an idea, I'm going to switch my screens over really quick. Oh, where is it? There it is. So what I did over the weekend is I actually finished this timeline that I started working on. So I started working on this timeline on Friday, during my Friday stream last week. And I have mostly finished the timeline, of course, because this is part of the outline. I can always come back to this and add more to it later if I want. Oh, also, by the way, sorry, you are definitely going to hear construction sounds in the background because, so there's like a building right next to me that is being torn down, so that way, like, they can build a new building there, so you are 100% going to hear construction sounds during this time. It's actually kind of cool to watch their process as they, like, tear this thing down. Anyways, so as I was saying, this is something that I was working on last time. I continue to work on it, and I've actually made the decision that I think I'm going to start this story... Where is it? Where is it? Right here. So this is where I have decided that I'm going to start the story, and this would be the spring of 2009. So again, this would be when the main characters are just finishing up 8th grade. They're about to go off to high school. I thought that this would be a good place to start off because this is actually one of the first... This is the first time that one of the characters kind of starts to allude to... I guess they're kind of like gender and sexuality expression. Because keep in mind, the main character, Brian, who is also the narrator, he grew up in a very, like, religious household, a very Christian household. And so this kind of, like, back and forth of, like, are LGBTQ plus identities okay? Are they not okay? Like, that's something that he kind of battles with throughout the entire story. Especially because, you know, his best friend, since he was very young, does eventually come out. And he has to kind of figure out, like, how do I deal with this? How do I like accept my friend but also still live my religion at the same time? That's kind of what the big thematic struggle of the story is. Hey friends who are watching, thank you for the likes. Drop some chat if you would like to say hi or if you have anything to say. Also, lurkers are fine too. Anyways, so I decided to start this story in 8th grade, and so that's what I've got planned out so far. Like, I have a couple notes of what I want to happen, and then I just started working on the actual, like, writing of what's happening. Now, one of the things that I have been working on is I've been trying to actually make this sound like it's an 8th grader talking, and I want to make this very distinct compared to when Brian, who's the narrator, when Brian is actually talking as a junior, because most of the story is going to take place in junior year. This is almost just kind of like a prequel or a prelude type thing that leads up to the main story. Hey Daniel, good to see you. I'm not too bad. How about yourself? And oh, I just lost my train of thought. So yeah, this is like kind of what's happening. So it's these three characters. They were just at the 8th grade, like the last 8th grade dance of the year, which kind of marks the end of their 8th grade, of their middle school years. And they're walking home, and there are multiple scenes of them walking home, because first it's walking home, and then they say bye to one of their friends, Ellie, who doesn't live in the same neighborhood as them, and then it's just Jackson and Brian who are walking home. So that's the scene that I'm working on right now. Daniel, good to hear that you're doing well. I hope you had a good weekend. So yeah, that's what I am doing right now. And again, one of the big things that I'm working on, one of the big things that I'm trying to focus on, is actually just like the language that I use and making sure that it represents what 8th graders would sound like. So I don't want to say that I had to dumb down my language, because I don't think 8th graders are necessarily dumb, but I think there are just certain things that are indicative of, you know, younger speakers one of those things being like shorter, choppier sentences, or sometimes even just very long, very kind of not necessarily complex, but just like run-on sentences. So some of the stuff in here isn't necessarily grammatical, but again, that's an intentional thing, because I'm trying to encompass what an 8th grader would sound like if they were talking about their life. I did decide to write this in the first person as well. So, or not the first person, I did decide to write this in the present tense as well. This might be something that I go back and change later. I haven't really figured out if I like the idea of this story being in the present tense yet. And I don't know, I always go back and forth between should I be writing in present tense or should I be writing in past tense, because with a present tense story, obviously you have that sense of urgency, things are happening in the scene, but with a past tense story, you have more kind of like this reflective feel to it. And there are some parts of this story that I feel like make a lot more sense as a reflective story, and there are some parts of the story that I think make more sense as a present in the moment story. But for right now, it is a present in the moment story. Something that I will say I'm pretty proud of myself in so far is actually capturing just kind of that that sense of 8th graderness, and also kind of making these characters all very distinct from one another. I know an issue that I sometimes have in my writing is sometimes is my characters oftentimes start to sound too similar to one another, or like the way that they interact with each other often just feels like it is the same person talking to themselves. And I feel like this version, like in this story, I've better captured that these are 3 distinct personalities. You could switch tense and POV between chapters. You know, that is an option. I have seen that work in some stories before, but because I consider this more of like a coming of age novel, I do want to just keep it in one single tense and one single perspective, since I want the focus of it to be on like Brian's growth, of course, but then also the growth of the other characters. And I think if I were to switch perspectives, I think I would actually lose a little bit of the struggle that Brian has to go to kind of encompass all of these aspects of his life. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually like personally not a huge, like, in addition to that, I'm actually like, I don't think necessarily that switching POVs is a bad thing. Like, I think some writers can definitely make it work. Personally, I don't really like books that do that. I like to have single person, I guess, kind of narrators who tell what's happening in the story, because I just like that aspect of like being in someone's head. And also I like that aspect of, I guess, not knowing everything that's happening in the world, and I kind of have to use my imagination and my creativity a little bit more to kind of figure out what's happening between the lines. Because, you know, if you have a first-person narrator, obviously everything that they think and everything that they say isn't necessarily going to be the absolute truth of everything that's happening in that world. The best example of this is probably, I don't know, like the Hunger Games series, for example. I actually feel like the first book of the Hunger Games series did a really good job of capturing that idea of we're inside Katniss's head the entire time, therefore we don't really know what other characters are thinking, and we don't really know how the world works. But as the book goes on, Katniss learns more about the world. And I think some of this is lost in the second and third books of the Hunger Games series, because unfortunately Suzanne Collins started to do a little more, I don't know, it was like, I know this is gonna sound really weird, but it was almost like too much world building, that it just didn't feel, it didn't feel like imaginative and I don't know, fantastical anymore. It just kind of felt like, oh, okay, these are the rules of the world, and Katniss is going to fight how the world works or how it functions. It was just a little too much of, I don't even know how to describe that. So you're the person that writes a backstory for each character, so you can imagine what they would... What's Dowhen? Oh, do when. Okay, there's supposed to be a space right there. Yes, Daniel, I am certainly that kind of writer. I like to have a very thick and full backstory for each of my characters. Because keep in mind, like, a character's past and their background is deeply going to affect what they do in the present. So, for example, like in this scene, let me show you. Okay, so there's actually this like little chunk I put up here, which actually starts to allude. It starts to like kind of reference a little bit of Jackson. Jackson is one of the other characters, the main characters in the story. So it starts to actually kind of like allude to Jackson being some sort of LGBTQ plus. Because here it says, it takes us a few minutes to get out of the building because Jackson wants to say bye to Miss Mackenzie. She's the choir teacher. Me and Ellie never took choir. I was in orchestra, but I heard good things about Miss Mackenzie. Some people thought she was a little weird because she had a pet parrot in the class, but I think most people thought she was nice. I think it was at the beginning of 7th grade when people started calling her mean names though. Things like word I will not say out loud and lesbo. These are words I don't say out loud. I think this was because she was also the advisor for the school's Rainbow Club, which is really just a gender and sexuality club. Not many kids went to Rainbow Club, but everybody knew who did go to Rainbow Club. I sometimes felt bad for those kids. Mom says a lot of those kids are just confused and need a friend, so they go looking in the wrong places. Dad tells me I should love them as Jesus would, but also that I shouldn't associate myself with them, or else other people might get the wrong idea. Jackson went to a meeting once, I think, not because he's one of those people. No, Jackson goes to church, so he wouldn't be one of those people. I think he mostly went because one of his other friends invited him. I tried to tell him what my parents told me, but he didn't listen. Some other kids started saying things about Jackson, but none of it stuck because Jackson was too nice for people to be bad-mouthing. That, and also because Ellie would threaten to fight anybody who talked about Jackson in a negative way. So in this right here, I'm capturing some of the backstory of like Jackson, and Jackson kind of exploring his gender and sexuality expression. And of course, we also get some characterization with Brian as well, because, see, Brian is definitely kind of he's naive when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like, he doesn't put the pieces together that Jackson could potentially be a religious person and an LGBTQ plus person at the same time. And that comes from the fact that Brian was raised in a way where he was raised to believe in a religion that does not accept LGBTQ plus identities. And so to him, the idea that Jackson can go to church and also be LGBTQ plus just is not like a possibility in his mind. And so those are like little bits of background that I shove into the story as I'm telling the story, again, from Brian's perspective. And more of that is actually going to happen in this next scene, because in this next scene that I'm working on, Jackson and Brian, Jackson actually kind of comes out to Brian, but not in a super direct way, because, it's never easy to come out to people. Like, even if they're your best friend, it's never that easy. And Brian still doesn't really get it, and that's going to be kind of like a recurring motif throughout this story, is that Brian is just so oblivious to Jackson. / he's also kind of in denial, because again, he knows that if he accepts that Jackson is some sort of LGBTQ plus, that he knows he might have to stop being friends with Jackson, but he doesn't want to stop being friends with Jackson. Do you think that Brian then is in the wrong, or do you think that he is too naive to understand yet? I think that Brian is too naive to understand yet. I mean, that being said though, there is potential for Brian to do wrong to Jackson, and actually we're going to see that throughout the story, is that Brian unintentionally causes a lot of harm to Jackson, which is, I mean, that sounds really sad, but it's true. Like, Brian does a lot of unintentional damage to Jackson. And so, yeah. And that's also one of the reasons why the other character, Ellie, actually gets really frustrated with Brian a lot, because, so Ellie knows that Jackson is some sort of LGBTQ+, but, like, and, like, Ellie accepts Jackson for that, because Ellie is the type of person to just be like, yes, I'm going to accept everyone for whatever they are, as long as they're not being, like, jerks. Brian, on the other hand, is still a little more, like, binary in the way that he sees things. And again, that's a product of how Brian was raised. So it's not that Brian is just inherently a person who doesn't accept LGBTQ+ identities. It's just Brian was raised that way. And again, kind of the inspiration for this comes from my own life, because personally I grew up in a household and I grew up in a church where like LGBTQ+ identities were not accepted. And so therefore, like, this is definitely kind of me documenting my personal experience going through that, and like how I had to wrestle with these ideas when I eventually came out, or when I eventually realized that I was not straight, and also not like cis for that matter, because I do identify as gender fluid, a transgender fluid person. So yeah, so this is like, this story is kind of like, is like, each of these characters is definitely a different part of me and how I had to deal with all these feelings. So he is unintentionally being vindictive. A little bit, yeah, he is unintentionally being a little bit vindictive, and, you know, there are going to be a couple scenes in the story later where, like, Brian is going to bring up, like, you know, the Bible says that LGBTQ+ people are, you know, are sinners, blah, 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 blah. You know, the same kind of rhetoric that a lot of religious people use when talking about LGBTQ+ expression and identities. And yeah, it's highly problematic. It is highly problematic, and it's meant to be problematic because that's the point of the story. I don't know how this story is going to end yet, though. Like, I have a couple ideas in mind. You know, when I originally thought this story through, I kind of wanted there to be some sort of, like, budding romance between Jackson and Brian, where maybe Brian would have to eventually start questioning his own sexuality. But I don't know. I don't know if, like, I don't really know if that's, like, how I want this story to go, or, like, how I want the direction of the story to go. I almost feel like their relationship as platonic friendship is a lot more important than a romantic relationship. I don't know yet. I'll figure it out as I go. The Bible also says to treat others how you would want to be treated. Yes, it does, actually. Well, I don't know what the exact wording is on that. Yeah, I don't know what the exact wording on that, but that is like the general interpretation, Daniel. You're right about that. Trying to think of where to go from here now. So if I reference back to my notes, basically what's going to end up happening is, like, the scene I'm working on right now is right here. So, like, as they get closer to their houses, Jackson wants to stop at the playground for a bit, even though it's past curfew and they could technically get in trouble. Brian agrees, and they go to the playground between their houses. Jackson talks about how a lot is probably going to change once they get to high school. So this whole, like, once they change, they're going to eventually start to change once they get to high school. That's definitely referencing, like, yes, Jackson is, like, low-key coming out and saying, like, hey, I'm not the same person that you thought I once was. Every religious text has some form of the golden rule. Yeah, you're right about that, Daniel. Every religious text basically does. I think for a lot of, like, Christian-based religions, or, like, Bible-based religions, though, I think a lot of it does come down to, like, Jesus's teachings in the New Testament, when he says, like, you have to love your neighbor, love your God, like, and those kind of, like, the three big things that he comes up with as like the major rules to follow for Christianity. So there's going to be this conversation now between the two. You ship Brian and Jackson. See, I really want to ship Brian and Jackson too. Like, I want to ship them so hard. And that just comes from, like... That just comes from myself because, like, you know, I don't know. I think that there needs to be more, like, LGBTQ plus young adult stories out there in the world. Young adult novels out there in the world. And I just don't think that there's enough of it yet. I think we're starting to get to a point where there's more representation, but I think we definitely need more. We need more of everything, not just LGBTQ plus identities. Oh, Monroe, you ship them too? Oh my gosh. Well, if everyone's... Okay, see, that's the thing I as a writer also have to think about as well, is like... If everyone wants to ship these characters so hard and I don't end up I write it so they don't end up getting together, people are gonna be so mad about that. Like if they read it, they're gonna be like, "What the heck, Mr. Her? You had one job to get these characters together." Oh, I don't know. I'm in like a surprisingly good mood today. I don't know why. I just have like so much energy. I think it's because I've been like. So, like, I was like, I don't know, the weather definitely makes a big difference, and I've been able to go outside and do a lot more, like, walking around, and I really like walking. I just, like, put my headphones on, have a podcast playing, and I just walk. That's actually where, like, a lot of my, like, thinking time comes from when I'm working on writing projects, is I just go on a walk, and I just get to think. Like, I get to zone out, because walking, you don't need to have a ton of attention focused on walking. And I just get to think about how my stories play out. I don't know. You know, at the end of the story, I'll probably hint that they get together at some point, but I don't know if I really want to, like, say conclusively that they get together, because, I don't know. I'm just really scared that them getting together romantically is going to take away from their individual, like, growth. And I'm just thinking about that in, like, the sense of, like, a Studio Ghibli movie, like Spirited Away, or, you know, Howl's Moving Castle, or Princess Mononoke, like, some of my favorite movies. Like, even when there is very clear romantic tension between two characters, and even if they may have some romantic scenes between them, at the end of the day, the story is still about their growth as individuals versus their growth as a couple. And I do want to capture that in this story as well. So I don't know. It's tough. It's really hard to, like... It's really hard to think about this. Not like romantic, just a little more than a friendship. Yeah, Daniel, that's actually kind of what I am personally thinking too. Like, I'm thinking that at the end of the story, maybe I end with them, like, I don't know, choosing to hold hands in public or something, or like, I don't know, having them have a talk where they, like, talk about, where they start to consider that they might like each other. So right, like, alluding to something at the end that suggests that they could potentially have romantic like potential, but right, I don't want to just like put them in a relationship at the end of the story. I just feel like that like that just wraps up too many. It just ends it too well, and I'm like, I don't think life is that clean. Like, I just don't think life is that clean. Did I just get an email? No, I did not get an email. Okay. I thought I heard my email notification, but it was not. Brian and Jackson could have a conflict after they come out. There's definitely going to be some conflict between Brian and Jackson, like after Jackson officially comes out. Because like, so keep in mind that this story is happening in like 2011, 2012, around there. So like, being gay still wasn't really a widely accepted thing back in that time. Like, even though they're going to, like, they go to school in Madison, Brian need to choose between his church and Jackson. Yeah, that is definitely going to be a big conflict that Brian has to deal with. Because like, personally, that was actually something that I had to deal with as a religious LGBTQ plus person, where I was like, you know what, my church does not accept LGBTQ plus identities, and I'm gonna have to figure that out for myself. Like, do I still stay with my church, or do I accept my identities? So that is definitely like a big thing that Brian is gonna have to go through. By the time Jackson officially comes out, Jackson has already stopped going to Brian's church, because they did go to the same church for a long time, and then Jackson just kind of like stops going slowly. I just forgot what I was talking about. I don't know. It'll come back to me. No, I don't want Jackson to say that. Alrighty. So, in these notes, I have to get them to end up at the park, or at the playground, essentially. How do I want to do this? guess, so, okay. So Brian says it's past curfew, we could get in trouble. Now, what Jackson is about to say is going to matter a lot, because what Jackson has to say, whatever Jackson says right here, has to be able to convince Brian to go to the park. But also, the way that Jackson says it is going to kind of show a lot of who Jackson is. So, like, I don't want to make it too flirty, I don't want to make it too, you know, whatever. Because I still want to keep it mostly, like, I don't know how to describe what I'm feeling. Jackson says... So, I don't know how attached I feel to this little interaction right here, but I guess what I'm trying to capture is that... I guess what I'm trying to capture through kind of like symbolic allegory is that... So, Brian has this rule where he's like, you know, it's past curfew, I should follow the rules, I should just go home, and I should not be at the park. And most parks have rules like this. Like, most parks say you can't be at the park past a certain time. And so then, like, Jackson kind of eggs him on and is like, you've always been a rule follower. He takes one more step forward. So that action of, like, taking one more step forward and also kind of, like, saying this, you've always been a rule follower, kind of, like, being like, come on, you never live a little bit. You need to live a little bit. And then that actually works. That gets Brian to finally reject that idea that he's always a rule follower, and then taking a step closer to the grass line. And again, I think, for myself anyways, I think I want to try to work this as like a bigger allegory or a bigger symbol of like Jackson continually pushing Brian to push his own limits. Because Brian just has so many, like, he just lives in so many boxes, and Brian just operates based on so many little boxes that he's given in life. And then here comes Jackson, who is kind of a little more free-spirited and forces him to get out of his comfort zone a lot more. Okay, so I guess I'm pretty happy with that interaction then. I mean, it's simple, it's short. But, like, some of you writers out there, you can see how even in your smallest interactions, like a 3-line interaction, you can capture a lot in it. And, you know, if I were to edit this a little bit more, I'm sure I can cram even more kind of like storytelling and character development into these 3 lines. But I'm gonna keep that like it is for now. In general, as a writer for myself, I actually like want to gravitate more towards this kind of writing where it's like, it's very short, it's very concise, but it's so loaded with like character development and plot development and thematic development that you don't realize how much of the story you're actually being told until you get to the end and you're like, whoa, There was so much development. Oh, they just like, wow, they just brought down more of the building right next to me. Cool. I've always wondered that why, like, when they're bringing a building down, why they also spray it with water. I wonder if that's to, like, keep the dust kind of, like, controlled. Because I bet if they weren't, I bet if there was no water, I bet all of that dust would just, like, puff out into the world. It's kind of cool to watch, like, these giant machines work, actually. Ooh, this is juicy right here. Okay, so this is some really big foreshadowing right here. Jackson says nothing else. I follow his small silhouette beyond the safety of streetlight into the darkness. Normally I'd be scared of walking through the dark like this, but the park feels familiar and safe. Also, Jackson's here. This is some juicy characterization and also foreshadowing. Because, I mean, look at that, like, the whole symbolism behind, like, following Jackson, going beyond the safety of the streetlight into the darkness, being scared of the darkness, but also remembering that it's a familiar and safe place, and also remembering that your friend Jackson is there. Ooh, that's juicy. I'm kind of proud of myself for that. Look at me doing all this, like, symbolism and allegory. I'm so proud of myself. Give myself a pat on the back for that. This is like so this is like the magic of, like, when I'm in like a good mood and I have a lot of energy, like, the writing I can create is, like, so much better than when I'm, like, sad and depressed. And I know people often think that, like, oh, when you're depressed, like, your art could be so good because, like, you have so many feelings. And, you know, I think there's, like, there's some truth to that, but also at the same time, it's really freaking hard to do art when you're really depressed. So, like, the idea of, like, the depressed, starving artist is definitely I don't know. I think it's a dangerous kind of ideal and a dangerous standard to work towards. I think our artists should be very well fed. Is wood chip one word? Time for the Googles. Wood chips is one word. Oh my gosh, my thigh is like so itchy. I think I might be getting a rash. It's allergy season. Now I have to decide how fast do I want this conversation to go. How many words am I at right now? Okay. Oops. This one is at 1,500, 644. Alright. So I guess I need this conversation to go somewhat fast because I don't want this first chapter, or I don't even know if this is a chapter yet. This might even just be like a prelude kind of thing. I don't want this to go on like forever. Because again, this isn't part of the main story. This is just like pre-story stuff. Oh, there they are over there. I see the construction people. I wonder what construction companies do with all of like the old rubble and stuff. Like, I wonder if it gets like repurposed or if it's just like, I don't know, they just take it to like a secret dumping ground. So what I'm working on right now is I'm trying to again capture, like, you know, while this conversation is happening, I'm still trying to capture like foreshadowing and other symbolic ideas throughout this, so that way like this conversation doesn't just happen for nothing. Because I don't know, I think that's one of the, like, I want every single one of my conversations and my stories to matter and to mean something. And I think that comes from, like, me watching so many movies and TV shows and anime and stuff where it's like, yes, conversations really matter in those, because in a movie you don't get a narrator necessarily. Like, you don't get a narrator who gets to explain the theme to someone. You just have to, like, try to show it through the dialogue and through the setting and everything else. So I try to do that with my own writing as well. And one of the writers that I recently got into, I'm forgetting his name now, but he's the author of the Dante and Aristotle Discover the Secrets of the Universe book. And I just love the way that he uses dialogue in his stories, where it's like, he'll literally just have like full pages of just like a back and forth dialogue, and I think it's so beautiful to get that back and forth. Like, you get to learn so much about the characters through dialogue if it's done well. And you get so much thematic development through dialogue as well if you do it well. Big caveat on the if you do it well. Like, you know what? All of this right here, I can actually put that into dialogue, so that way it's a little more realistic. For those of you watching who don't know, Death Note is a anime from the early 2000s. It is, like, definitely one of the edgiest animes I have ever seen in my entire life. It is, oh wow, I don't even have words to describe it. It is so unnecessarily edgy. That's the only thing I can say about it. Foreshadowing! Yeah, so, like, Jackson is 100% low-key coming out in the scene, and Brian just doesn't get it. So this really fast back and forth I have going on right here. This is a pacing tool, or a pacing, I guess, kind of thing that writers can use, where it's you just have this dialogue like bop 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 going back and forth super fast. And one of the really good uses of this is actually to like literally pull the readers pull the reader down as they're going through. So like the reader's physically going through the page faster than they normally would have. It also creates a lot of suspense, or it can create a lot of suspense. It can create a sense of urgency, because again, it's a lot faster than the other text of what's going on around it. Alrighty, y'all. It is 9:58, which means I actually have an office hour that I have to get to. So I'm gonna be ending this writing stream for right now. I'm gonna probably continue working on this. So next time I come on tomorrow, or potentially even later. No, I don't think I'm gonna do more writing stream later today. It's actually like, I'm not gonna lie, it's actually kind of hard to do writing stream because it's like, I don't know. So much of my process is just sitting and staring at the screen and like envisioning things in my head, and I feel like that's not super exciting to watch. But anyways, I'm gonna end the stream for right now, and if you see me go live in like a minute, it's because I have to do English 10 stuff. So if you want to stick around for English 10, you can definitely stick around for English 10. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful, fantastic freaking Monday. Thanks y'all for watching, either if you're watching live or if you're watching after the fact. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, and again, have a wonderful day. Bye y'all.